You'd think a lakeside HOA office would be the last place anyone would end up nearly calling in law enforcement. You'd think somewhere peaceful, with blue skies reflecting off calm water. People would spend more time tending to their gardens or watching their grandkids fish off the dock than getting tangled up in neighborhood politics. But these HOA communities, they have their own species of people. The ones who walk around with clipboards like they're deputized by the Constitution itself, ready to ruin someone's weekend over mailbox paint colors or grass height. And in this particular HOA, there was one queen bee, Karen. Now, Karen wasn't just any HOA enforcer. No, she wasn't even technically employed by the HOA office. But that didn't matter to her. She considered herself an unpaid guardian of suburban law and order. She walked those paved community paths like she was patrolling sacred ground. The staff, poor things, let her hang around because it was easier than deal with the fallout when she didn't get her way. See, I wasn't a usual fixture at the Lakeside Ranch office. I wasn't one of the retirees spending hours complaining about shrub height regulations or arguing over who could park a kayak near the boat ramp. I owned property here, a simple lakeside cabin, tucked away enough to avoid most HOA headaches. But from time to time, even I had to show my face to handle paperwork. Lease renewals, maintenance approvals, all those little administrative boxes that had to be ticked so no one from the board came knocking, clipboard in hand. That's all I was doing this time. Just stopping in, paperwork in hand, looking to wrap up some routine filings and head back to my quiet patch of water. What should have taken 10 minutes, 15 tops, turned into something far more absurd. When I stepped inside the office, Karen was already there. She didn't look up at first, too busy perched behind the front counter, like some sort of suburban gargoyle, lecturing the receptionist in that syrupy, condescending tone middle-aged HOA Karens reserved for people they think they outrank. The poor receptionist smiled through it, nodding along like someone hostage to politeness. I gave a polite nod, slid my paperwork across the counter, and took a seat in the small, sunlit waiting area. The receptionist smiled, grateful for the interruption. Karen, however, turned her attention toward me like a hawk spotting something shiny in the grass. "You'll need to come back another time," she said, voice pitched just loud enough to carry through the empty office. I glanced up from my phone. "I have an appointment." Karen smiled that tight, self-satisfied smile HOA Karen's practice in the mirror. "We're updating our policies. New guidelines on who's allowed inside during processing hours." I looked at the posted office hours. Clear as day, right there by the door. I was well within them. "Well, I'll wait," I said simply. "Thanks." That wasn't the answer she wanted. Karen didn't like to be contradicted, especially not by someone she didn't recognize as sufficiently deferential to her imaginary authority. She leaned over the counter toward the receptionist, muttering something about security concerns, unauthorized individuals, and needing to escalate this up the chain. I heard her, of course. Subtlety wasn't Karen's strong suit. The receptionist, bless her patience, gave me an apologetic glance. She's having one of her days. "I've got time," I said with a small smile. And I meant it. Karen disappeared into the back office, phone already in hand, probably texting half the HOA board about the situation. I watched the minutes tick by, listened to the quiet hum of the air conditioner, the soft shuffle of paperwork. Nothing dramatic. Nothing worth escalating. Not yet, but Karen had other plans. She returned, puffed up with fresh indignation. Phone pressed her ear. "You're going to need to leave," she said, louder now, performing for the invisible HOA audience she imagined surrounding us. "You're not authorized to be here during these hours." "Your hours are posted," I said calmly. "I'm here during them." "Well, I'm on the phone with the sheriff department now. If you refuse to leave, this becomes trespassing." The receptionist's face was a silent scream for help. Even she knew this was ridiculous. Karen stepped outside, pacing the sidewalk like a general preparing for battle, her voice drifting in through the glass as she exaggerated every detail, to the poor dispatcher unlucky enough to answer her call. "He's refusing to comply. He's becoming hostile. I'm feeling threatened. Yes, I need someone down here immediately." Hostile? I hadn't moved from my chair. Threatening? I'd barely spoken. But Karen knew the power of exaggeration when dealing with bureaucracy. What she didn't know, couldn't possibly have known, was who was sitting across from her, calmly sipping coffee and scrolling emails. She wasn't just calling in a random patrol car. She was about to summon officers who reported directly to me. Because in this county, when emergencies happen, when people need help, when 911 gets dialed, my name is the one at the top of the chain. Fire, medical, law enforcement. All of it runs through my desk. But I wasn't about to ruin the surprise. That's not how you deal with people like Karen. You let them write the ending themselves. More time passed. The receptionist tried to return to her work, typing awkwardly while Karen paced outside like a dog barking at its own reflection. Neighbors began to gather. These communities are like ant farms. To stir the dirt, and everyone comes running to see. A man walking his golden retriever slowed to a crawl. A woman jogging by paws to tie an already tied shoe. Even a maintenance worker pushing a leaf blower found a reason to linger. Karen loved it. The audience, the attention, the imagined authority swelling behind her. She pointed dramatically toward the office window, giving everyone her version of events. Refusing to leave. Disrupting business. Complete disregard for rules. I stayed seated, because nothing unsettles people like Karen more than calm defiance. 15 minutes later, the familiar flash of blue and red lights painted the parking lot. A squad car pulled up, 2 officers stepping out, faces I recognized instantly, not just because we shared a profession, but because I'd personally signed off on their promotions within the last year. Karen approached them like royalty greeting knights. Thank goodness you're here. He's trespassing, refusing to leave, becoming aggressive. Good afternoon, sir, the senior officer said, cutting her off and addressing me directly. We were told there was some kind of disturbance. I stood, stretching casually, letting Karen's confusion stew a moment longer. Not for me, just here handling paperwork. Karen's mouth opened, then closed, opened again, confusion bleeding into suspicion. Why are you addressing him? He's the problem. I called you to handle this. The younger officer tried, unsuccessfully, to hide his smirk. Ma'am, we're very familiar with this gentleman. Karen's gaze bounced between us, searching for footing. Familiar? Why? He's not on any committee. He doesn't live here full-time. He's our boss, the senior officer said simply. District commander for this region, including this HOA. Karen paled, audibly gasped. You could almost see her mental clipboard crumbling in her hands. You're the police commander? She croaked. Correct. And you didn't think to mention that? She snapped, tone strangled between outrage and embarrassment. Didn't seem relevant at the time, I said with a shrug. The officers exchanged a glance. Would you like us to address this as a misuse of emergency services, sir? We can file a formal report, cite harassment, trespass. Karen's knees looked weak. I let the silence stretch just long enough. No need to escalate further. Let's clear up the misunderstanding so I can finish my paperwork. Karen scrambled for dignity. I didn't realize. I thought I was trying to protect the community. That's our job, ma'am. The officer said flatly, no apology, no concession, just a quiet, defeated shuffle back into the office, her audience of neighbors watching through barely open blinds. The officers nodded, professional and polite, and made their way back to their cruiser. I returned to my seat, sipped my coffee, watched Karen vanish behind a closed door, her empire of petty power dissolving faster than she could spin a news story. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly grasp, was how far this little fiasco would ripple through her kingdom once word spread. And trust me, it would. After the squad car pulled away and Karen scurried back inside her glass-walled office like a mouse who just realized the cheese came with a trap, the neighborhood slowly settled back into its usual rhythm. Sort of. I could feel the curiosity still lingering like humidity in the air. People who'd watched the drama unfold from behind blinds or the safe cover hedges were probably already halfway through text chains with their neighbors. HOA gossip spreads faster than wildfire and burns twice as long. I stayed seated, calm, patient. If there's one thing a career in public service teaches you, It's that you let entitled people like Karen stew in their own silence. They'll always reveal more if you give them space. Inside that office, behind that frosted glass door labeled Authorized Personnel Only, Karen was no doubt trying to piece together how her master plan had blown up in her face. Probably pacing in circles, firing off panic texts to her HOA board allies. Maybe even crafting a narrative where she wasn't the villain here. Karen types never see themselves clearly. To them, being wrong is impossible. It's just everyone else failing to understand the rules they made up on the spot. What Karen hadn't considered, what people like her rarely do, is that authority only matters when other people respect it. Her power came from fear, from intimidation, from exploiting the vague gray areas between neighborhood guidelines and actual law. She could bully a retiree over a fence height violation. She could scare a new homeowner into repainting their shutters. But she couldn't bluff her way through someone who not only knew the law, but commanded the people who enforced it. That realization had knocked the wind out of her earlier. And now, I was content to let her choke on it. The receptionist, poor thing, finally emerged after what must have been an awkward closed-door scolding. She gave me a weak smile, slid my paperwork back across the counter, and said in the softest, most exasperated voice, "I'm so sorry." Again. "Not your fault," I assured her. "You're just doing your job. Some people make that harder than it needs to be." She gave a tired little laugh. "You have no idea." Oh, but I did. I gathered my things, left the office without another glance at the closed door. Outside, the summer heat pressed down like a weight. The lake shimmered in the distance, mocking the entire idea of HOA conflict with its calm indifference. I could have left right then, gone back to my cabin, poured myself something cold, and let the absurdity of the day fade with the sunset. But Karen wasn't quite done yet. As I reached my truck, keys in hand, I heard the click of her heels on the sidewalk. Sharp, deliberate. The sound of someone trying to reclaim a shred of dignity through posture alone. "You think this is over?" she hissed, low enough to avoid witnesses, but loud enough to carry venom. I turned slowly. I didn't think it had started. Her jaw tightened. "You humiliated me in front of my community. My board." "No," I corrected. "You did that to yourself. I just sat quietly and let it happen." She pointed, finger trembling not with fear, but with rage. "People like you think you're above the rules." "No," I said again calmly. "I just understand the difference between HOA rules and actual law." Her lips pulled back in something that might have been intended as a smile, but landed closer to a snarl. "We'll see how long you're welcome here. You might think your badge protects you, but it won't help when the board votes on property privileges." Ah, there it was. The thinly veiled threat wrapped in suburban passive aggression. Karen's last-ditch effort to claw back control. Not through police, not through policy, but through paperwork and whispers. "I own my property, Karen." I reminded her, "My rights don't hinge on your mood." She stepped closer, lowering her voice further. "We have ways of making things uncomfortable for people who don't respect the community's standards." I couldn't help the laugh that escaped. It wasn't loud, wasn't mocking, just genuine amusement at how small her world was. "Karen, the people you called today? They answered to me. The 911 dispatcher, also my department. If you want to escalate this into something formal, be my guest. But I'd advise reading your own bylaws before you start drafting petty complaints." Her face darkened like a storm cloud that had just realized the wind wasn't blowing its way anymore. "You're making a mistake staying here," she spat. "No," I said, stepping into my truck. "You made the mistake, assuming your clipboard meant more than the law." I drove off before she could answer, leaving her standing there with the weight of her own irrelevance settling heavy on her shoulders. Back at my cabin, I sat on the porch, watched the sun bleed red and gold across the lake. Sometimes silence is the best rebuttal. Karen would stew. She'd gossip. She'd spin her tale to the board and anyone else who'd listen. But none of it would stick. Not now. Not after today. People like Karen depend on fear, on the perception of power. Once you strip that away in front of an audience, all that's left is noise. And yet, I wasn't naive. Karen wouldn't let this drop. She'd file her little reports, draft her memos, Maybe even try to convene a special meeting. That's how these people operate, through layers of bureaucracy, so tedious most sane people give up before reaching the final form. But I dealt with bureaucracies bigger than her HOA. Karen's game wasn't new to me. I'd just been playing it on a larger board. Sure enough, the first letter arrived 3 days later, folded neatly, typed in the most formal passive-aggressive tone imaginable. Notice of community conduct concern. Not a violation. Not even an official citation. Just concern. That word did a lot of heavy lifting in Karen's world. The letter outlined my disruptive presence at the HOA office, my refusal to comply with community representatives, and warned that continued disregard for HOA protocol may result in restrictions on community amenities. Amenities I didn't use. Protocols I hadn't broken. I smiled, tucked the letter in a drawer alongside a growing collection of similarly laughable paperwork from past HOA skirmishes across the county. Karen wasn't the first of her kind. Wouldn't be the last. What she didn't realize was that every letter she sent, every meeting she called, only strengthened my eventual case if this ever reached court. Harassment wears many disguises, but paper trails don't lie. I made no move to respond. No angry emails. No dramatic confrontations. I let her exhaust herself. Let her dig deeper into her pit of pettiness while I went about my life. Fishing on the weekends. Hosting friends by the water. Enjoying the property I paid for in full without her permission. But Karen, as expected, escalated. By the following week, I'd been accidentally left off community emails. My name removed from HOA meeting minutes. Small, petty slights designed in needle to provoke a reaction. I gave her none. When she sent notice about upcoming changes to dock access protocols, aimed squarely at me, I simply forwarded it to legal. Because what Karen also didn't know, this wasn't my first HOA war. I had a lawyer on retainer for exactly this brand of nonsense. A specialist in HOA overreach. Someone who, for the right fee, could turn Karen's little empire of clipboards into a cautionary tale printed in legal journals. We filed no suits. Not yet. Patience wins battles faster than paperwork. Instead, my lawyer sent a single, crisp letter. Not threatening. Not aggressive. Just a polite reminder of property rights, state statutes, and the limits of HOA authority. Karen received it on a Thursday. I know because the receptionist, bless her, again, called to apologize in advance. She's not handling it well, she said. I didn't think she would, I replied. Friday, the HOA board president, not Karen, reached out, an olive branch wrapped in awkward diplomacy. Of course we value all our property owners. Of course there's been a misunderstanding. Of course you're welcome at all facilities. Karen sometimes gets a little overzealous. Translation, please don't sue us. I accepted their apology with the grace Karen lacked. Made a point to attend the next HOA meeting, where I sat quietly as Karen squirmed her seat, her authority shrinking with every polite nod my way from the actual board members. Because that's how you dismantle power built on fear. Not with anger, but with patience, with presence, with unwavering calm in the face of petty tyranny. Karen stopped speaking to me after that, stopped making eye contact, stopped leaving little notices taped to my door. The neighbors noticed too. The golden retriever walker waved more often. The jogger smiled. Even the maintenance guy gave me a knowing nod. In communities like this, word travels fast, and reputation lingers longer than rules. There's something funny about HOA communities. People think they're these quiet, well-oiled machines where rules keep everything running smoothly and neighbors sip lemonade over friendly backyard fences. But underneath the fresh paint and manicured lawns, it's more like a slow-motion battlefield. Every meeting, every memo, every snide comment at the mailbox is another move in the game. And Karen? She wasn't done playing. After the board's polite apology, you might think she would back down, realize she picked the wrong target, and slunk back into her little kingdom of petty infractions and fabricated rules. But that's not how people like her operate. Entitlement doesn't just vanish because reality steps in. It festers. It plots. It doubles down. For a couple weeks, things seemed Quiet. Too quiet, honestly. No notices on my door. No Karen marching down the street like she owned it. I even thought, briefly, maybe the board really had put her in her place. Maybe she'd finally realized that poking the wrong bear wasn't worth the energy. But then came the lake access restriction. It arrived in the form of another letter, this time official, this time with the HOA letterhead and legalese, so thick it practically required machete to read through. Due to recent policy updates, it said, access to the community dock will be restricted to residents who have submitted compliance documentation regarding storage, maintenance, and conduct. A new policy, Karen's fingerprints all over it, thinly veiled, barely legal, designed to exclude exactly one person, me. The problem? That dock wasn't community property. It sat on a slice of land deeded decades ago to a cluster of lots, including mine. HOA had no authority over it, no right to restrict access, no legal standing to enforce such a policy. But Karen wasn't counting on legality. She was counting on inconvenience, on me rolling my eyes, shrugging, and walking away to avoid the hassle. That's how she'd won every small battle before. Exhaust people into surrender. She didn't know me nearly well enough. I made a few calls. County clerk's office, property records, a friendly real estate attorney who owed me a favor. Within a day, I had documents in hand proving my access rights, signed and recorded long before Karen ever bought her first clipboard. The next HOA meeting wasn't for another week. That gave me time to prepare. When I showed up, I didn't come alone. I brought a neighbor, retired Navy, the kind of guy who looks like he could still snap a broomstick in half without breaking a sweat. Good man, good neighbor, tired of Karen's antics himself. I also brought copies of the paperwork, neatly organized, highlighted where necessary. Evidence speaks louder than entitlement. The meeting was the usual circus. Karen perched at the head of the table, flanked by her allies, face pulled so tight it could have doubled as a drumhead. They ran through the motions, minutes, budgets, landscaping proposals, before finally reaching the new dock access policy. Karen cleared her throat, voice dripping with faux authority. As you know, we've had issues with certain residents disregarding our guidelines. This new policy ensures our amenities remain in compliance with community standards. She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't have to. Everyone in that room knew. I waited until she finished, until the motions were seconded, until the floor opened for questions. Then I stood, calm, collected, not angry. Anger gives people like Karen fuel. Just factual, just prepared. I appreciate the board's diligence in maintaining our community standards. I began. However, I reviewed the proposed policy and consulted county property records. The dock in question is not, in fact, under HOA jurisdiction. Access rights are tied to deeded property, not HOA membership. I have copies of the legal documentation here for anyone who'd like to review. I handed them out one by one. Silence filled the room as papers changed hands. I scanned highlighted clauses. Karen's face darkened with every word she read. This policy, I continued, is not only unenforceable, but could open the HOA to legal action for interference with deeded property rights. I'm confident no one here wants that. The board president, a man who'd looked exhausted since the moment I met him, rubbed his temples. Karen, did you verify this before drafting the policy? She blustered, fumbled. It's standard procedure, many communities' best practices. It's irrelevant, I said, voice still calm. Because it's illegal. Silence again, not just from the board, from the neighbors in the back row who'd come for the spectacle, from the retirees who lived for these petty dramas, from the newcomers realizing maybe this wasn't the utopia their realtors promised. The board president sighed, motioned to rescind the proposed policy, seconded, voted, unanimous. Karen's glare could have etched glass. Afterward, as people filtered out, a few offered quiet nods, small smiles, murmured thanks. Even in a place where appearances matter more than reality, truth earns respect. Karen, meanwhile, gathered her papers with shaking hands, shoved them into her designer tote like weapons she'd just discovered were made of foam. You think you've won something? She snapped under her breath as I passed. No, I said. I think I've reminded you this isn't your kingdom. She didn't answer, just turned, stalked off into the night, her heels stabbing at the pavement like she could punish the ground itself for her defeat. But Karen wasn't done yet. People like her never are. They retreat, regroup, and come back with new tactics, more subtle, more insidious. The next round didn't come through letters or policies. It came through whispers, rumors, spread like mold through the cracks of polite conversation, that I was hostile, that I bullied the board, that my position made me dangerous to disagree with, that I had a temper, that I'd threatened lawsuits over nothing. At first, I ignored it. Petty gossip dies without oxygen. But then it reached my tenants. See, part of my property included a small rental cabin, nothing fancy, but enough for seasonal visitors looking to fish or unwind by the water. Good people usually, quiet, respectful, but suddenly they were getting cold shoulders at the community center, sideways glances at the dock, passive-aggressive notes about parking too close to common areas. One evening, a tenant knocked on my door. Hey, is there a problem with us being here? Did we break a rule or something? I don't want to cause trouble. That's when I knew Karen had moved from attacking me to targeting anyone connected to me. I thanked them for their honesty, assured them they'd done nothing wrong, and made a decision. No more waiting for her next move. No more giving her space to spin her web unchecked. I called a meeting, not an HOA meeting, a neighborhood gathering. Barbecue, open invite, bring your own chairs, neutral ground. Food softens even the hardest lines. I made sure the invitations reached everyone, not through the HOA channels Karen controlled, but hand-delivered, friendly, casual. No agenda, no speeches, just neighbors, face-to-face, without clipboards or bylaws. They came. Curiosity will outpace suspicion every time. Families with kids, retirees, new couples, even the maintenance guy. They came, they ate, they talked, and somewhere between the ribs and the lemonade, the walls started to crack. People shared their Karen stories, the fines for flower beds, the warnings about bird feeders, the veiled threats about property values. Laughter replaced fear. Recognition bred solidarity. And when someone finally asked, "So, what's the real story with you and the HOA?" I told it, calmly, factually, no drama, just the truth. By the end of the night, something had shifted, not officially, not in writing, but in the way people looked at me, in the way they looked at Karen. Her power had always been perception. Without it, she was just another neighbor. And neighbors talk. Within a week, complaints started trickling in to the board, not from me, but from others, about Karen's conduct, about her misuse of authority, about the hostile environment she'd fostered. The board, weary of the drama, began to distance itself. Policies were reviewed. Oversight increased. The receptionist, once so hesitant, seemed lighter, freer in her work. Karen still lurked, of course, still patrolled, but her glare had lost its edge. Her clipboard, its weight. I didn't need to confront her again. The neighborhood had done it for me, in smiles, in conversations, in choosing community over control. Because in the end, that's how you win wars like these, not through force, but through persistence, through showing up, through standing firm when others hope you'll fold. Karen had played her game, and lost. If you've ever wondered what it looks like when someone like Karen starts to lose control, it's not immediate. It doesn't explode in one big scene like some movie villain getting carted off in handcuffs. No. With HOA Karens, it unravels slowly, quietly, like watching a flag lose its color in the sun. The authority fades, the confidence cracks, and before they even realize it, the people around them have already stopped listening. That was where Karen was headed, and I wasn't about to interfere. I didn't need to. Nature was already taking its course. In the weeks after my neighborhood barbecue, things shifted in small but noticeable ways. Conversations happened without her. Plans were made that didn't require her approval. People who used to nod along with her ridiculous HOA memos now smiled and waved at me when I passed, when knowing looked like we'd all survived something together. But Karen, bless her heart, refused to read the room. One afternoon, not long after I'd hosted that barbecue, I found myself back at the HOA office again. Not for any official business this time, just to pick up a routine form about parking decals. Something dull, something harmless, or so I thought. Inside, the receptionist greeted me with a smile so genuine I almost didn't recognize her. The tension she'd worn like armor the last time was gone. "You just missed her," she whispered conspiratorially, glancing toward Karen's office door, which hung open and empty. "Missed who?" I asked, playing dumb. "Karen. She's been in meetings all morning. Board reviews." That raised an eyebrow. "Reviews?" The receptionist nodded, lowering her voice like we were sharing a state secret. "Let's just say complaints have been piling up. Not just from you, from a lot of people. The board's finally looking at how she's been handling things." Ah, so the tide wasn't just turning. It had already turned. I thanked her, took my paperwork, and stepped back outside into the summer heat. Across the street, I caught sight of Karen herself, clipboard in hand, phone pressed at her ear, pacing with that same frantic energy she'd had the day I first met her. Only now, it wasn't righteous authority she was radiating. It was desperation. I could have walked away. Could have let her twist in the wind without another thought. But there's a certain satisfaction in giving someone like Karen just enough rope to realize they've been tying knots around themselves all along. So I waved. She saw me, froze, lowered her phone slowly like a soldier realizing the war had already been lost. "You think you're clever," she snapped, crossing the street with the kind of aggression usually reserved for riot shields. "No," I said, leaning casually against my truck. "I think I'm patient." Big difference. "You embarrass me. You made me look like a fool in front of the board, in front of the neighborhood." I shrugged. "You did that all on your own, Karen. I just showed up with facts." Her eyes narrowed. "You won't be here long. People like you, bullies with badges. You come and go. I've been on this board for 15 years. And how's that working out for you lately?" I asked, glancing pointedly at her empty office. "You might want to start cleaning out that desk." For a moment, I thought she might scream. Instead, she turned, stalking off with all the dignity of a raccoon retreating from a tipped-over trash can. Furious, flustered, but unable to do a damn thing about it. That night, the neighborhood Facebook group lit up. Screenshots of the board's email announcing a review of leadership roles. Rumors flying that Karen's position was under scrutiny. Comments about overdue changes and fresh starts. And buried between the lines, the quiet acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, everyone had been tolerating her tyranny for far too long. Still, Karen wasn't one to go quietly. The next phase of her campaign wasn't through policies or parking tickets. It was through alliances, whispered conversations with a few remaining HOA loyalists who still believed in her paper-thin authority. Little gatherings at coffee shops, quiet meetings behind closed doors, trying to rally support the old-fashioned way, with fear and favors. But fear only works when people believe you have power. And favors? Well, Karen's weren't worth much anymore. One of those loyalists, a man I'll call Stan, because of course his name was Stan, approached me not long after. "Just so you know," he said, glancing over his shoulder like we were in some spy novel, "Karen's planning something." "Karen's always planning something," I replied. "That's not news." "No, I mean she's trying to get you removed from the community altogether. Says you're a disruption, a danger to the peace." I couldn't help but laugh. "Removed? I own my property, Stan. I'm not a tenant. I don't answer to Karen's clipboard. She's drafting a formal complaint to the board. Wants to force a vote." "A vote on what? My groceries? My driveway? My existence?" Stan actually looked sheepish. "I'm just giving you a heads up. Between us, a lot of people are tired of this. They're only going along because, well, you know how she is." I did, and I knew exactly how this would play out. Sure enough, the following week, an emergency HOA meeting was announced. Topic: community harmony and leadership accountability. It was Karen's last-ditch effort to claw back relevance, wrapped in bureaucratic nonsense to make it sound legitimate. I showed up early. Front row. Calm. Prepared. Karen opened the meeting with her usual self-important flair, reading from a prepared statement about the importance of community standards, respect for authority, and the need to address ongoing disruptions from certain individuals who undermine the harmony of our neighborhood. It was almost impressive how many words she used to say, "I don't like this guy." When she finally finished, the board president, a man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, sighed and asked, "Is there an actual motion being proposed here, Karen?" "Yes," she said, with all the smug satisfaction of a cat pushing a vase off a table. "I move that we formally censure and restrict the property access of the individual in question for repeated violations of HOA conduct expectations." No one seconded. Not one person. Silence stretched, awkward and thick. Finally, the board president said, "Without a second, the motion dies." Moving on. Karen's face turned a color I can only describe as expired ketchup. She looked around, waiting for someone, anyone, to back her up, but her loyalists stared at their papers, their phones, their shoes. Even Stan wouldn't meet her eye. "Very well," the president said, clearly eager to escape. Meeting adjourned. And just like that, it was over. Karen stormed out, her heels clacking like gunshots against the tile. I stayed behind, chatted with a few neighbors, accepted a handshake from the board president. "You handled that well," he said. "Didn't have to do much." I replied, she beat herself. And she had, by overreaching, by assuming fear would carry her further than it could, by forgetting that people, even in places like this, eventually get tired of tyrants. The next month, Karen's resignation was announced effective immediately due to personal reasons. No fanfare, no farewell party, just a brief, clipped email and a for sale sign in front of her house 2 weeks later. Funny how fast things unravel when people stop being afraid. Neighbors stopped whispering. They started chatting openly at the mailbox again. The receptionist at the HOA office smiled like someone who'd just been told she could finally take a lunch break without checking for sticky notes on her desk. The community settled, slowly, into something like actual peace. As for me, I kept fishing, kept waving at joggers, kept unloading my groceries without incident. The lake remained calm, the sun kept setting, and life moved on. Because the thing about people like Karen is, they burn out. Eventually, all you have to do is stand your ground, keep your receipts, and wait. They implode under the weight of their own entitlement. It just takes a little patience. There's a particular irony in watching someone try to rebuild their empire when the foundations have already crumbled beneath them. After Karen's so-called resignation and the quiet, hurried sail to her home, I thought that would be the end of it. The villain exit stage left, the curtain falls, the audience applauds. But HOA Karens? They don't disappear. They resurface somewhere else, under a new name, perhaps, but always with the same clipboard, the same entitlement simmering just beneath the surface. Rumors filtered back to me, as rumors tend to do. Karen had relocated to another suburban enclave a few towns over, one of those gated communities where homeowners associations wield even more power. It made sense. She wouldn't go quietly into a neighborhood where people cut their lawns at their own discretion. She'd find somewhere rigid, somewhere desperate for order. Still, none of that concerned me. Not anymore. My neighborhood settled into something like peace in her absence. The board, freed from her iron grip, restructured policies to be less about control and more about actual community benefit. Fewer fines, more transparency. Even a new neighborhood committee was formed, one focused on events rather than enforcement, block parties, fishing tournaments at the lake, little league fundraisers, normal things, human things. The receptionist at the HOA office, her name was Claire, I learned, seemed to bloom in the months after Karen's departure. Friendly, relaxed, efficient without being officious. One afternoon, while I was filing a routine permit for a small shed, she confided something that surprised me. "You know, there was talk about you running for the board." I laughed. "Me? After all this?" She smiled. "People trust you now. You stood up when no one else would. That matters here. It was tempting, I won't lie. The idea of having a say, of preventing another Karen from rising through the ranks unchecked. But I declined. My victory wasn't about holding power. It was about removing those who abused it. Besides, my fishing boat didn't need HOA approval to leave the dock. Still, I stayed involved. Quietly, helping neighbors navigate the bureaucracy when needed. Speaking up when policies seemed to lean too far back toward the old ways. A presence, not a politician. It was months later when the real cherry on top landed squarely in my lap. A package, certified mail, from a law firm I didn't recognize. For a moment, I wondered if Karen had found some new angle to harass me from afar. But no, this wasn't a threat. It was, as the enclosed letter explained, a notice of settlement. Apparently, during her brief tenure in the new HOA, Karen had overstepped yet again. Filed fines she wasn't authorized to file. Trespassed onto properties under the guise of inspections. Harassed a neighbor's teenage daughter over a supposed noise violation that didn't exist. This new HOA? They didn't tolerate it. One homeowner had sued. Others joined. A class action suit formed. Karen, faced with mounting legal fees and no HOA budget to shield her this time, had been forced into a settlement. Part of that settlement, bizarrely, involved restitution to anyone she'd wronged in her previous positions elsewhere. A lawyer with far too much time on their hands had dug through public records, HOA minutes, and complaint logs to identify victims. And there I was. Enclosed was a check. Not large, a few $1,000s. But it wasn't the money that mattered. It was the wording. Restitution for undue harassment and violations of property rights. Legal recognition, in writing, that Karen had been wrong, that I had been right, that everything I endured had left a paper trail long enough to catch up with her in the end. I deposited the check with a smile. Used it to fund a neighborhood barbecue. Bigger this time. Bounce house for the kids. Live music. Local vendors. A celebration, not just of Karen's downfall, but a community resilience. Of what happens when people stand together instead of letting one person dictate the rules. Neighbors who once kept their heads down now raise their glasses. The board president gave a small speech, thanking everyone for weathering the storm and coming out stronger on the other side. Claire handled the raffle with the ease of someone who no longer feared passive-aggressive Post-it notes. Even Stan showed up, sheepish but sincere in his apology. I should have spoken up sooner, he admitted over a hot dog. Better late than never, I told him, and as the sun set over the lake, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, I realized something important. Revenge, when it comes to people like Karen, isn't about grand gestures. It's not about shouting them down or matching their pettiness step for step. It's about patience, persistence, letting their own actions unravel their authority while you build something better in the background, because they can write policies. They can issue fines. They can call meetings and draft letters and scream into the void about respect and order and rules. But what they can't do, what they'll never understand, is foster real community. They can't inspire loyalty. They can't earn trust. They can't create a place where people want to stay, to laugh, to gather. Karen left behind nothing but resentment and lawsuits. I helped build barbecues and fishing tournaments. Guess which legacy lasts longer? Months turned into a year. The neighborhood thrived. Property values rose not because of arbitrary rules, but because people took pride in their homes again. Not out of fear, out of genuine care. Kids rode bikes without worrying about HOA notices. Families walked dogs without measuring leash lengths to the inch. And me? I finally got that shed approved. Built it myself. Painted it the color Karen once tried to find me for. Just a shade off from regulation beige. No one said a word. They just smiled. Because the HOA wasn't about fear anymore. It was about us. About people. About neighbors. About living, not policing. And every time I see someone new moving in, looking nervous about the rules, I make a point to introduce myself. Offer a hand. Share a story. Let them know we've been to the fire already. And we came out stronger, kinder, better for it. Because in the end, that's how you truly beat people like Karen. Not with fines, Not with meetings, not even with lawsuits, with patience, with neighbors, with time, and maybe, just maybe, with a little ironic shade of off-regulation beige.